Karen Neurohr, a librarian at the OSU Library. Today is Saturday, October 21st, 2006, and I'm at the ConocoPhillips Alumni Center with two of the OSU alumni, Mr. B.J. Smith, who graduated in 1955, and Mr. Paul Matthews, who graduated in 1954. And they're here to record their stories for our project titled O State Stories, an oral history project of the OSU Library. We appreciate you coming here today so that we can hear your stories. Well, today is homecoming for Oklahoma State University, and let's start with homecoming. What were homecoming events like when you were students here?
Well, they were very similar to this in many ways. But the big difference was that living groups usually had a house decoration and a float. Having viewed the parade today, there were very few floats. And the living groups, the sororities and fraternities are matching up. And I didn't see many house decorations on independent housing, dormitory housing. And they used to each have a display or some kind of house decoration also.
Yeah, we lived in Bennett Hall. We often had both the float and the house decoration in Bennett. We were there the first year it opened, fall of '50s. We started together. I finished a year later because I missed a semester with rheumatic fever and threw me behind. And we went to high school together, as a matter of fact.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, we were in the high school class together, yes. Same graduating class, 49 of us.
49 of you. Well, what made you decide to come to Oklahoma State University?
Well, I wanted to take art, and I had actually never set foot on campus because I figured the only art school was at OU, and I'd been there a number of times, Boys State and speech tournaments and whatnot. And the principal of the high school came around and trying to get where we were planning on going to school. And I said, well, I guess I'll go to OU because that's the only art school. He said, this is not true. A&M has one. They have a very good professor, nationally known and internationally known, Doe Reed. So I had never set foot here, but I decided that's just where I wanted to come. So I applied and was accepted before I actually saw the campus.
Mr. Matthews, what made you decide to come to OSU?
Well, I think both my parents liked this school, but both my parents went to Southwest Missouri State, which is now called Missouri State University, and they were their first opponent this year. But there was and in graduating in high school in Guyman, there was a inclination to remain in northern Oklahoma. There were more OSU graduates in the area than there were OU, and I just never cared for OU, to be quite frank.
I later went to graduate school there after the service, and I said I was doing missionary work to the south.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what life was like for you as students. I'd like to know what you wore when you went to classes. What did people wear?
All right. Typically, I wore a dress shirt with a pullover sweater, slacks, never jeans, and not walking shoes, but regular leather shoes, nice looking shoes. And the girls on campus all wore skirts. You could see their legs, which is nice. And in fact, I had one professor, and he'd always have the women sit up front, wouldn't go and he'd say, now pull your skirts at least up to your knees as you're sitting in the front of my class. We guys would sit in the back. But anyway, they dressed better, we'll put it that way. And later, ROTC was required of all freshmen and sophomores. Land grant colleges at the time, so everybody was in ROTC, and you wore your uniform 3 days a week, I believe it was.
Yeah, Tuesday was drill days. So
drill days, and then if we went into advanced ROT, as most of us did, both BJ and I did, we were commissioned second lieutenants on graduation. We wore our uniform about 4 out of 5 days, so that helped too in your clothing. But students were a little dressier. That means that 4 out of 5 days you had a tie on. For most of the day and in your classes.
And going to church without a coat and tie was almost unheard of.
Oh.
Now they come in tank tops and flip flops, but much different. One big difference was I forgot the exact figures. It was something like one girl for every 5.5 or 6 boys
something
on
like
campus.
that.
Yeah. So I think now there are more girls on campus than boys.
And that was difficult in the dormitory because there was one telephone for every hallway. And it was almost impossible to find the phone to call out. No cell phones, of course. And I worked with the switchboard in Bennett Hall, and it was hard to even get calls in. So it's easier to walk across campus and call the girl down if she was in a dormitory or a sorority house than try to make a telephone call and find out about a date.
And they kept us separated. The boys lived in Bennett, Cordell, Hanner, and Thatcher, and the girls in Willard, Murray, North Murray, and Stout. So there was an isolation across campus to keep us apart. And the girls had hours, and they had to be in.
Yeah.
Did you not have hours that you had to be in
No.
the boys' dorms?
I don't think so.
No, the boys did and the girls did.
No.
Mhm.
No.
So were there ways to get around the hours that the girls had to be back?
Not
home?
really.
Well,
Well,
they were pretty strict. I mean,
yeah, my wife's sorority, they at 10 o'clock, if you happen to be on the porch, the house mother would start flashing the light, meaning that the girls better get in there pretty quick.
I knew a
and
girl. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, go ahead. And then they
I-
could stay out until midnight on weekends.
Yeah.
But that was the latest.
I knew a girl at Willard. I think they closed the door at 10:30, and she was say good night to her boyfriend at 10:30, and they locked the door, and she had to plead to get back in, and she was reported to the dean of women for being late.
Well, what were sports like here at OSU when you were students?
You want to take off?
Well, we as students we got tickets to all the football games and all the wrestling matches and most of the sports, and we got every other basketball, either even or odd games. It was automatically part of your tuition or whatnot.
Yeah, we had the football was not very good. We had what they called the thin 30.
Yep.
J.B. Whitworth was the coach, and he tried to muster as many as 30 guys to get out on the field. But they played both ways then. They didn't have defensive and offensive teams. They didn't have a face mask, by the way, either. So there was never a face mask penalty while we were in college. And there was a track inside the stadium. The stadium was seated about 25 to 30,000 at most at that time. It's called Lewis Field at the time, and later on it was too. The basketball arena, the Gallagher Hall, was you always had to get over there early. The student section would fill up pretty quickly, and usually we'd get there an hour and a half before a ball game if you wanted to get a seat.
It was,
And they had good basketball teams, good wrestling. They were the predominant sports at the time.
and there was no restriction. IBO was much smaller. Gallagher was much, yeah. They didn't restrict people sitting in the aisles or standing, so they would squeeze 9,000 into a 6,000 seat arena before they started enforcing the fire codes.
And wrestling was full, and they aren't anymore.
Yeah.
Wrestling matches were just as full as basketball games. You really had to seek an early start if you wanted to see either a wrestling match or a basketball game.
Were the athletes treated the same as the other students?
Well, Bennett Hall was the northwest wing, was the athletic wing,
Yeah.
and there were two serving lines at a cafeteria. You didn't have a choice. You went through and they heaped on your tray whatever you were eating that day. But their side, since they were building strength, they got steaks and things that we didn't get on our. We got mystery meat on our side.
One thing different about basketball, the players were all white.
Yeah.
There were no black basketball players.
No football players either.
And the college was still segregated by when I graduated in 1954. We had one or two classes where a black student would come in. They were in graduate school, only in graduate school. So that was quite different.
In my senior year, we had some on campus, 54 and 55. That was after Topeka versus whatever it was.
Yeah, the Topeka versus Board of Education. That decision had been made after I graduated.
But there was, I think, Bennett Hall. They put the few blacks up on the top floor, so a redneck wouldn't object to sharing a bathroom with somebody. But we in the classrooms, they sat amongst us or whatnot. And whereas at OU, they were segregated. They put little screens around them and kept them. They were in the same room, but they were segregated in the classrooms, which we never did. People said, that got a lot of national publicity, and people said, when are you going to integrate it at A&M? I said, we already have. We just don't put little screens around them at their desk or whatnot.
There were some foreign students on campus, but not very many. It was pretty much an Oklahoma based student body. Most everybody that you met had graduated from an Oklahoma high school.
We had a big Ethiopian group because
There were some.
our president was had a .4, and we had a branch in Ethiopia. So there was 2 floors in Bennett that were all Ethiopians.
Henry G. Bennett was the president when we started, and he was killed in a plane crash in Tehran, Iran. And I went to his memorial service. You may have too. Senator Robert S. Kerr read the eulogy, so it was rather impressive. The field house was filled with people. And his house was where the Bennett Memorial Chapel is now.
Yeah, he was my Sunday school teacher that first year. Next year he was involved at the Point Four and out of the country most of the time. But first time I saw him in Sunday school, I thought, who's that little old funny looking man, looks like a bulldog? And they said, that's the president of the university, he's your Sunday school teacher.
Well, what was the political party system like on campus when you were here?
Well, I was very active as a Young Republican. I was president of the Young Republicans Club for a couple of years, and grew up a Republican. And we were the larger club. We were larger than the Young Democrats. A very conservative campus, politically. But I was also an independent. I was active in the independent party. At that time we had two campus political parties. Now I understand there's more. The representative party, they call it, they represented the Greeks, all the sororities and fraternities, and the independent party, they represented town students, those living in dorms that were unaffiliated with a Greek organization. Then we held primary election, then we had a nomination, and if you met the nomination, you ran for the student senate or bought a publication or whatever student office that you wanted to pursue.
What did your campaigning consist of?
Well, we put out, largely it was dependent upon each candidate to do their own, but the party helped some. We would put together a slate, and what we'd do, we'd take our candidates around. We would call the resident in charge of, say, Willard Hall or Murray Hall, and say we'd like for the girls to assemble at 10:30, and we're going to bring our slate of candidates over. Those are going to run for student senate, whatever. If each of the colleges had a nominee, like veterinary medicine, home economics at the time, education, arts and science, and so on. And we would go over and we'd introduce her as the president of the political party you represented. You'd introduce your slate. And my wife tells me the Greeks she was a sorority gal, so the Greeks did the same thing. They're the representative party. They took around and they could be more sure of who they got to vote, though. They could say, listen, you got to get out and vote. We're going to give you demerit if you don't get down there. Now, we couldn't do that. We didn't have that kind of leverage, but it was getting better by the time that I'm not crediting myself, but I think we were getting more independent candidates and better candidates. BJ probably has a different view, probably.
Well, I wasn't involved, but he made sure I voted. So.
So you all knew each other when you were students here?
Mm-hmm. And then
we were roommates the first year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Came out of high school. Guyman is orange and black tigers, so we didn't have to change colors when we came
Kept
down.
the same colors. Yeah.
There used to be tigers here originally. One thing different I noticed we lived in Bennett Hall, and very few people had cars. Like there was behind a small parking lot with cars parked facing south into the building, and then another row on the other side, and they were never full. And when I came back to visit in '57 after I got the service, there was parking lots everywhere, and everybody seemed to have a car, at least one car. But back then, you walked over to the girls' dorm, picked up your date, and walked her downtown to the Leachman Theater, and then walked her back home before 10:30 or whatever.
And if it rained, you'd have to take a cab, but they were pretty cheap then. And campus jobs paid 50 cents an hour per janitor. I think in the art department, BJ got me over to pose at an art class. I think they paid 75 cents.
Yeah, that was good money.
I got to keep my clothes on, though. Fortunate for the students that I did.
Mr. Smith, you graduated in '55, and your degree was in what?
In art, it wasn't specialized, just studio art they call it now. But when I went to graduate school, I majored in painting.
Mm-hmm. And then after you finished graduate school, what did you do?
I went to Berkeley for a couple of years, and then came back, and it was 2 years of service, and then graduate school, and then Berkeley for a couple of years, and I came back and worked at what was then the Oklahoma Arts Center in the Fairgrounds. It's now moved downtown. It's called the Oklahoma City Art Museum. But then I came back here in the fall of '65.
And what was your role here?
Well, they hired me. They wanted to start a permanent gallery, so that since I'd been working in a museum in Oklahoma City, that was my assignment, I guess, to start a gallery. And I taught 1 or 2 classes a semester, but my main job was the gallery.
So you started the gallery that's currently here now?
Yeah, well, It was then the art department was on the top floor of Whitehurst. The third floor was geography, I think it was, and the first two floors was administration. And we had a small gallery up there by the elevator that we called the Whitehurst Art Gallery. Then we moved over to what was then Gardner, and it was a Gardner Art Gallery. And then when they changed it to the Bartlett Center after it was remodeled, they kept the gallery, the name the same. So.
Was it challenging trying to get that started here?
Yes, finances being one, and I did everything by myself. They've got committees now, but I had to book the shows and unpack and hang the shows and try to squeeze as much as I could into our little budget. And I change shows every once a month. We have a different show, and a show for the summer.
And he has a B.J. Smith conference room in the Bartlett Hall over there. He's the only member of our class that has a conference room named after him.
How did you publicize the shows?
I sent press releases myself to all the newspapers in Oklahoma and some neighboring states like the Wichita Beacon or whatever, and tried to get as much as I could in the Ocala, particularly the student shows. We had two student shows, one in the fall, one in the spring. And I tried to get them over, and I tried to get photographers from the news press to come down and take pictures. And I was always hassling people to get something in the papers.
Mr. Matthews, what was your degree in?
My degree was in political science with minor in history and economics. And I functioned for about 34 years as a legislative lobbyist when I decided I didn't want to go to law school. And I worked the state legislatures of Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma for 34 years, and at times Illinois, Arkansas, and New Mexico. I worked for an organization based in Washington, D.C. called the Highway Users Federation. This was a coalition of national groups like the American Petroleum Institute, the Motor Vehicle Manufacturers, Tire Manufacturers, AAA, Trucking Association, all the various components of organizations such as the American Farm Bureau Federation that relied primarily on trucks to move their product. And our mission was to work state legislatures to see that laws were passed earmarking all highway users' taxes, motorist taxes, gasoline taxes, registration fees, the like, to roads and highways and bridges, not diverted off to prisons and education and welfare and a variety of others. And Oklahoma being one of the states that did some bit of diverting. But it was an interesting career, and I enjoyed just learning the political processes of each state. My job was to work primarily with trade association managers, and they were also lobbyists in most cases, like the manager of the Missouri Trucking Association, and he was part of my Missouri Highway Users Federation. And I served as sort of the ex officio executive director of each of these state groups. I was their meeting planner. I helped organize their coalitions and held the meetings during the year. And then we had a regional meeting every year for at least 4 states. And that was fun, enjoyable, and I'm still doing some of it. I'm still doing some work for the Oklahoma Highway Users Federation since I live in Oklahoma City, and the organization didn't seem like it could get along on other than my help. So I give most of my time away now.
What were the campus buildings like when you were here? The student union, was it?
It was brand new, and I think our third year they started the library. When the year before we came, Washington Street went through the middle of campus. Up, there was a lot of protests of it being closed, of being a main artery north and south. So we came, the concrete had been ripped, but there was this sort of muddy ditch in front of the Union, which is now Formal Gardens. And there were a lot of Quonsets on campus. Between Hanner and Thatcher were all Quonsets left over from the military days. I mean, from the what do you call it? The Veterans Village. The village up on the hill where married student housing is now was temporary frames they got from the Army.
Were they still using those buildings
Yes.
when you were here?
Yeah, but I had
For
classes.
housing? Or?
Yeah, and up on the hill with those military.
In fact, Bannon Hall didn't have a cafeteria yet when we moved in.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be open that year. They had a jumping enrollment, and they opened it up, and so we had to go walk over near where the library is now to a temporary frame building where they had a cafeteria for us.
Yeah. But the library, the old library, was essentially right where the Alumni Center is. That was and it was a much smaller facility. In fact, we watched the campus power station was where the library. We watched them knock down the large chimney.
It was where the classroom building is.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you're right. For the classroom building. Right. You're right.
They roped it off, and they said at a certain time was going to blast that chimney. That we went to watch it fall. And
Yeah.
they had started the library and had the steel girders. One guy crawled up one of the girders to watch it and got hit with a chip with a brick that flew across and knocked him off of that thing. He had his picture in the paper being revived.
But the campus was, of course, we're talking about a campus of about 9,000 students, as against the 20,000 some now. So about half the size in student population. And but most of the students from out of town lived in dormitories, but they could, and there were a lot of town students also. But it was a pretty self-contained campus, and as BJ said, if you had a date that didn't think anything about walking your date down to what downtown theater was called the Leachman Theater at that time.
Furniture store now.
Yeah. Was that what it is? Okay. Yeah. And there was a place called Brooks upstairs there at Campus Corner across from what the Hideaway is now. And that was kind of, it lost its patronage when the student union opened up, because most of them prefer to go to the union to get a Coke or a cup of coffee or whatever.
And there was a lounge on every floor back then. It's mostly offices now. But the fourth floor had that outdoor area. They had dances out there at night, sometimes bands.
Yeah.
And a lounge they called the Marine Lounge on that fourth floor.
And the music was, of course, that was before rock. Rock didn't, the big band sound of the 30s, 40s into the 50s. Bands like Guy Lombardo and Xavier Cugat and Ralph Flanagan played for the junior senior prom. But it was good dancing, and I still prefer that music.
And in addition to athletic events, we got tickets to the Allied Arts, free tickets. Our $48 a semester tuition paid back then.
Yeah, our freshman year, $48 a semester, bought you all the hours you wanted to take, plus your football tickets and half your basketball and half your wrestling and your Allied Arts.
Went up to 75, but I said they're pricing out of everybody's range. People going to start dropping out of school. They keep raising tuition.
Did you have to buy a meal card separately then?
Well, in the dorm, the meals were included.
The meals were included
So
too.
you just went through the line and got what they were serving that day.
And we mentioned half, but even an odd. But I found out early on that when students are enrolling, you could walk down the line and say, "Are you interested in you like basketball?" Not very well. Would you like to sell your ticket? Well, maybe $10 will bring you the other half of your ticket, or maybe the same thing with wrestling. They were always available, and they were pretty cheap in terms of amount of money.
The odd tickets were the first, third, and fifth game, and so forth. Even second, fourth, and sixth were the even games. And had to check the schedule, see what you wanted to. Had the best selection of opponents.
Yeah.
We were in the Missouri Valley back then.
Yeah.
Who was your big rival?
OU.
OU was a big rival, yeah.
In basketball, I guess it was St. Louis. And,
St. Louis and Bradley and Drake were all Creighton, and Wichita State then it became.
We had originally been a charter member of the Southwest Conference, and we pulled out to join the Missouri Valley to be with OU in Kansas, and they pulled out, started the Big Six.
And Kansas, we played Kansas every year.
Yeah.
Even though we were in a different conference, we played KU. That was a big. Henry Iba and Fog Allen had a big rivalry going, and like you said, St. Louis U with Eddie Hickey. That was, DePaul. We played DePaul, University of Chicago, because they had played A&M had played DePaul in the Red Cross game, and after we won the national championship, NCAA, they had the NIT National Invitation Champion and the NCAA champion play each other in New York, and we won it. That's when Bob Curlin went against George Mikan, the first two 7-footers. So they carried that on through our experience here, and those were big rivalries. Good turnout, though. Gallagher Hall was full for both wrestling and basketball.
Living in the dormitory, did you feel like that was a good experience overall? Did you really form a close bond and have lots of fun activities outside of class with people in the dorm?
We still got people that live in Bennett Hall we still see occasionally.
We had lunch just. We have a fellow Bennett Hall that lives in Honolulu, and he comes back every summer. And we met downtown Oklahoma City here just a couple of weeks ago, and had 4 or 5 or 6 of us to get together and reminisce about. And we get together frequently. Yeah.
The good old days.
Yeah.
Well, when you were students here too, the university was getting ready to change the name.
Right.
Do you remember very much about that? Was that a big deal to the students at all?
It was changed in '57, so I've got 2 diplomas. One says A&M from '55, and they gave me another one that says Oklahoma State.
Yeah. Well, I got a second. I was a member. I joined the Alum Association right on graduation, and they sent me a new diploma after it was renamed Oklahoma State University, and it says originally conferred at Oklahoma A&M College, May 1954. So I have both diplomas, even though I have 1 degree from here.
And back then, well, when I first came back in '65, fall classes didn't start till after Labor Day, and then went past a week or 2 past Christmas.
Right. Yeah.
Now it starts in early August now.
That was a big change because we went. When your Christmas vacation really was a work session because the semester didn't end until you came back from Christmas vacation. You went to Christmas vacation, came back, you got 3 more weeks about, and then the end of the semester. So that's a much nicer arrangement now. But we didn't start as early. We started after Labor Day, and it ran up until the 1st of June.
A lot of students objected because they signed contracts to work through Labor Day in the summer, and they couldn't do that when they changed the opening dates.
But
They
most
thought it
of
would hurt them getting jobs, summer jobs.
yeah, most of us had summer jobs that we were dependent upon to get us through the school year.
Did you have spring break when you were students?
No, we didn't have spring
We
break.
had a long weekend for Easter.
That was
which
all.
They can't do now.
Yeah, yeah, and that was it. No fall break.
It was called Christmas break, not winter break.
Yeah. Well, we had maybe a couple of days at Thanksgiving. I don't recall.
Yeah, we got off. I think in the class of Wednesday, had Thursday and Friday, and the weekend.
But it wasn't like it is now in terms of breaks through the year. And I envy the students now that can finish the semester before going home for Christmas, because I always had some kind of a term project that I had to complete over the Christmas season. So that kind of interfered with some other social activities.
I always carried books home. I didn't always read them. But
Mr. Smith, were there any professors or classes in particular that you have a real fondness for?
humanities is required. I don't think they have it now, but Dr. Bailey was my favorite teacher. I took every class of his I could, and he was, I guess you'd call him mentor. And in the art department, Dale McKinney was one of my favorites. Samuel Koneski, neither one are around now, but I have a lot of good memories of Dr. Bailey. And his teaching, he would come in very dramatically and tell us about some novel we were reading and act out the characters and whatnot.
Do you remember any books in particular that you had to read when you were?
We read just about everything. Being it was 2 semesters you had to take it, we did all the classics, Faulkner and stuff that they don't read probably today.
And how full were the classes usually?
They were, in humanities there was a lecture 1 day a week, and then you had classes 3 days a week. So you had they were all at I think it was on Tuesday we had the lecture. It was in the old Williams Hall. What was that called? The Prairie Playhouse.
Prairie Playhouse.
And it was always full.
That's just south of where the Serotine Center is now.
Yeah, where the parking
Toured
lot
it
is now.
building.
Was the
But yeah, I had a very favorite. My advisor, Dr. Guy Donnell. He was a professor of political science. Always wore a bow tie. You never saw. It's another thing. You never saw a professor in other than a coat and tie. Certainly not. I didn't. But Guy Donnell, he called himself a hairy bird Democrat, meaning he was very conservative. But he would like to gather. We'd have coffee together over at the student union. He liked to get some of his students together, especially when he was their advisor, and he was always trying to get me into sociology and psychology. And as a political, I preferred history and economics. So he was always trying to broaden my interest, I guess, but he wasn't altogether successful. But he was a great guy. And in the history area, I guess Sidney Brown probably was one of my favorites, and I still see him. He later, unfortunately, transferred to OU, and finished. He retired as a history professor there, but he's a great guy. He came on campus about 1952. Not a whole lot older than he just gotten his doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin, and I had an English history class with him, and we had about 14 or 15 in the class, I guess, and I liked it because you knew you were going to be called on every single class. He grouped us around in sort of a semicircle, and you knew that the assignment, whatever it was, you better be prepared because you're going to be. And I like that. I like frequent grades rather than dependence on a final exam. But those were two guys that I really enjoyed. But I enjoyed most of my professors here. Very different group.
When I was a student here, the art department was in the attic of the Moral Hall, and it was an attic. It didn't have any windows, and there were the concrete beams that came down. If you got forgotten, raised up under one of those, you cracked your head. But and they had ceramics, and the messier classes done in Qantas over by Thatcher. Then when I came back in '65, they moved us to the 4th floor of Whitehurst before we finally got a permanent home in the Bartlett Center.
We had a lot of, and as he said, I had a lot of classes in Quonset huts, and they weren't always real warm, or they were too warm. You know, the heat regulation was difficult in those, and you really felt when we went in the military, we felt like we were very much at home because we got to college in such buildings. But it was, and of course we had we had military science classes in Quonset generally too.
After big victories in football, they would either give us or we'd demand a walkout the next Monday.
Oh yeah, well, there were walkouts.
And one time they wouldn't give us one after what game we'd won, and the students were going around trying to get the other students to leave their classes and protest in front of the library.
Okay,
and I was
so
in a Quonset.
Explain that a little bit. What do you mean by a walkout?
No classes on Monday.
Yeah, they didn't declare a holiday, but if we won a big game, the students would all group together and demonstrate on the campus.
I was in a Quonset one time. They came by and they were running sticks up and down the side of the Quonset trying to so they disrupt the class. The professor finally gave up and leave. I can't compete with that noise outside.
And administrators usually gave in, and they had several panty raids. I didn't really participate in those. I don't think you. I always
the
claimed
first one I didn't know about till the next day. I slept through the whole thing. They said that the whole bit was off running around hollering and coming back, and I slept through it all. Didn't even know. The next day I heard about it. But when I came back in '65, a few years we had the Streakers Night down on the strip.
And if you went steady, you were typically thrown into Theta Pond. I was thrown into Theta Pond, unfortunately. Hit a rock and cut my shoulders. Probably a good thing because they thought they were going to make me go over to the sorority house and sing to the Kappa Deltas in my underwear. But I was spared that because I had blood all over my back. They took me back, and it wasn't much of a cut, but it worked to my benefit.
I was thrown in my senior just because I'd never been thrown in. Everybody said I shouldn't go in before I graduated. Which I've got pictures of. Someone carried a camera along and took pictures of me carrying me down the street in my underwear and throwing me in.
I noticed that you're both wearing a ring.
Yes.
On your hand today. You might hold those up for the camera.
Zoom in on those.
Those your class rings?
Yeah, mine says 55.
Yeah, move them over a little bit. Though.
Which way with this way?
Okay.
Is that going to show up?
And if you could just describe what's on your ring. I think did you select what symbols would be put on
Well,
there?
mine says 55, and it has the Union, which is a little worn. The other side has it says BFA, Bachelor of Fine Arts, and has the old crest, the wheat shock, the plow, and the gear, which is still above the windows on the old part of Gallagher Iba.
Mine is essentially the same. The student union is pretty well worn off that side, and they said the symbol at the time of a plow and a wheat shock, and mine says BA 54, and of course the date of 1891, Oklahoma A&M College. But when we had a 50th anniversary 2 years ago here, I know a fellow that was also from the class of '54 asked me if there was any chance that I'd sell this ring, and I said, well, no way at all. And in fact, I said he had a hand twice the size of mine. I said, I don't know how you'd get one, but undoubtedly somebody would make that. I asked the Alum Association here one time. They said no, they didn't have any in stock, but Balfour or somebody probably has some kind of a design. I don't know, but it was unique, and it's still serviceable at least. I wear it every day.
Do you wear it every day?
I wear mine for good luck on football games. I didn't wear mine as much because my hand got fatter as well as my body after I graduated. So I had it enlarged about probably 10 years ago. So I started wearing it again.
He did more manual labor than I did, I guess. My hands were made pretty small.
Well, what do you, obviously you come back for homecoming, you come to reunions and things like that. So what do you think it is about OSU that brings people like yourselves back and that makes you maintain that connection with the university?
The current theme is we're orange forever, I guess.
I think
a lot of good memories. You come back hoping to see some people you used to know and whatnot.
Right. Yeah. We enjoyed ourselves here. 4 of the better years of my life were here, and I even came back for homecoming when my wife and I lived in Wisconsin. That was a pretty good little trip. We came down and spent 2 or 3 days, but it was fun to get together with people we knew and see the games. But after we moved back to Oklahoma City, of course, I come back to homecoming every year. My wife comes back occasionally. Most years she comes back, and she maintains a very close relationship with her sorority here, more so than I think we do. I think a fraternity and sorority brings people back together a little more than the dormitory does, in terms of getting back on a reunion type of thing. But we get together informally with people we knew in college, and we do this about every summer.
So our freshman year, that fall, was when the Korean War started. So I was reading, well, the only sure deferment was ROTC because you had to take the first 2 years. But a lot of people were transferring to schools that had ROTC that didn't. And Panhandle State got ROTC because they were losing so many students. Truman had declared it to be a national emergency, so being in college wasn't an automatic deferment like it was in Vietnam.
And interestingly, when you won't remember this, but President Truman fired General MacArthur as the commander-in-chief, and there was quite a demonstration on campus in opposition to that. And I was among the demonstrators. I recall that I felt it was that Truman should not have gotten rid of MacArthur at the time. But generally speaking, though, it was a pretty peaceful field. There wasn't agitation. There weren't a lot of people around like there were in the '60s, certainly.
They were violent.
Yeah, there wasn't any violence.
Burning
There was no
buildings.
threats of bombing of any kind. Well, there were no drugs. I didn't know any. In 4 years here, I never knew of anybody that took any kind of drugs. Now there was people. In fact, there were a lot of people that smoked, more so than now. And it was dry. Oklahoma was dry then. There were no alcoholic 3-2 beer. That was the only beverage that was sold of an alcoholic nature. So that was one thing in the dormitories. They very closely monitored people bringing liquor into the dormitory, and you'd see posted occasionally a number by a telephone, and generally it was a bootlegger's number. Because that was the only way that liquor could be purchased. There were no liquor stores in Stillwater.
You had to drive to Kansas.
Yeah, or drive out somewhere. But anyway, from that standpoint, there really wasn't any. And most of the hairstyles were short among men. We wear our hair about like we did when we were in college, and but people were generally pretty neat and elderly. But you didn't see any of these hippie types roaming around campus. If they had been, they'd probably be thrown in Theta Pond.
The controversial haircut when we were here was the ducktail, was a flat top with long hair on the side that went back and sort of looked like a ducktail in the back. Yeah. That got parents upset or whatnot. I got my first flat top here because I couldn't get it to lie down, so I just thought I'd let it stand up. The little barber shop where I got it done the first time is still their little white stucco building across from Joe's is the barber shop. And it gets harder and harder to find people who do flat tops, by the way. Sometimes people call this a crew cut. A crew cut is rounded back here and squared in the front. If it's squared all over, it's called a flat top. If it's short all over, it's a butch. But you know, no one knows those differences anymore.
I didn't know. Did you have family members who came to OSU? Is that a tradition in your family at all?
My youngest son came here initially because he promised his dad he'd graduate from OSU, and he did. But he graduated from Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Couldn't get his major here. He decided he wanted to get a major in audio recording engineering, and Ohio State was one of the 3 schools that offered it. And we could afford it, and we let him go up there. The other son started in a small liberal arts college in Illinois, went into the service, got married, divorced, and then came back out and finished an accounting degree at Southern Illinois University. He's now a CPA in St. Louis. So. And the other son, the younger son that went to Ohio State, fortunately married a Texas girl, lives in Dallas, so he's a little closer than we expected to be.
Yeah, my brothers and I were the first in my family to go to college, and my older brothers went in through GI Bill. And I came here because I'm 50.
Are there any other stories that you want to share with us today for the interview? Anything else you'd like to tell us?
You know, I'd have to think a minute about that.
Something that's G-rated, I guess.
Well, we can turn the camera off.
But I think, you know, generally it was a nice experience. We were reasonably well behaved. There wasn't. I played in the ROTC band for the 2 years. That way, I didn't have to clean a rifle each week. There was they got to wear white leggings and a white helmet. You know, that was. And the ROTC band was about as big as the college band at the time. We played for a couple of football games, in fact.
What instrument did you play?
I played a clarinet. I'd played a clarinet in Guyman High School. BJ was the editor of our newspaper in high school, and I was a sports editor. I worked for him. He was my boss.
The ROTC was in where architecture is now. That was still the old gym back then, but that west side was where their offices were. Then Qantas on both sides. They're no longer there.
But the difference in the student, I think the most noticeable thing you could say from the decade of the 2000s against the decades of the early 1950s is how the student body looked. If you could take a picture of the people walking across campus, you say, "My gosh, this is kind of a military school, isn't it?" But very the women students were very neatly dressed. Today, not to say that they look bad by any means, but having been on campus frequently, they aren't as neat in the way they look.
I know, coming back to being on the faculty, when I was a student, you didn't question your grade. If he gave you a D, you figured you deserved it. Then after I came back, they got into the student rights thing, and people started protesting grades and taking it to committees to review what the grade you'd given them and all this. And student evaluations was a big change, and student attitude toward faculty when I came back.
And I wasn't exposed to this. I'm glad I didn't have to give anybody any grades.
What advice would you give to students of today or to future students?
I'd say pursue a course that you want to work in the rest of your life. You ought to work in something you like and enjoy. There's no percentage in being in a field of which you feel it's a burden to go to work every day. Certainly, both of us, we worked in areas that we really enjoyed and got to pursue it.
Because being in art, I was one of the few whose parents supported. A lot of people their parents said, "I'm not going to pay for you wasting your time getting a degree in painting." And Dad told me one time, he said, "I don't know how you'll ever earn a living, but do what you want to do." And I found out later that when he was a young man, he wanted to be an artist, and his dad got him an apprenticeship in a machine shop so he could earn a real living. And I found out he had an uncle on the Smith side that his dad got him a job at the railroad and kept him from becoming a painter. So I was the first one that was allowed to pursue what I wanted to do.
But there are a lot of majors available, and I think maybe the students should they should look to see what is available. There are some areas that they may not have thought of. Their parents may not have thought of. They should pursue it.
When I was teaching, I used to say they probably should take a year off between high school and college to get that out of their system before they come here and party the first semester and flunk out and have to start over. But the first time away from home. But it's do what you want to do and be serious. I knew students when I was a student that would change their major their senior year. They decided they didn't want to work in this field, so they would suddenly switch to another area they discovered they liked better. Okay. I don't know if that's any good or not, or what.
I hope we covered what you wanted.
Thank